Plato once said, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." This was most certainly true for those who saw the end of World War I. Unknowing, they sought to rebuild their lives in the 1920s. In this video series, we'll be discussing the effects of World War I and the United States' return to normalcy. Information on this presentation can be found in Chapter 15, Section 4 of your Orange Book. We're discussing Goal 8, Objective 3, assess the political, social, cultural, and economic effects of the war on the United States and other nations. Our essential question is, how was life in the United States affected by World War I? As World War I ended, Americans began to adjust to peace. The end of World War I produced an unstable international order, and communism was spreading in Europe. A fear of communists and political radicals was ignited right here in the United States. In addition, a flu epidemic of 1918 gripped the world and devastated the U.S. with millions of deaths. So the Soviet Union emerged as a communist nation under Lenin in 1918. Lenin called for workers all over to revolt in opposition to capitalism. So we start to see these rebellions and revolts break out across Europe. And strikes in the United States caused many in the United States to worry about the spread of communism here. This is known as the Red Scare. During the Red Scare, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer responded by arresting thousands of people suspected of being political radicals, and these were known as the Palmer Raids. Some of them were radicals, others were simply immigrants with absolutely no ties to the revolution. The government would deport the accused without any kind of trial. So in 1920, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, was formed in New York City, and this was created to try to protect the rights of individuals, and these are the rights established by the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. So the ACLU assisted with court cases involving civil liberties, including the famous case of Sacco and Vanzetti. War spelled the end of some economic opportunities for both women and African Americans, and this was because there became kind of an intense competition for jobs between African Americans and soldiers returning from the war. And this leads to some race riots, particularly bad riots in Tulsa and Chicago in 1919 and 1921, respectively. In addition, the country is experiencing inflation. The war had created high demand for goods and also a scarcity of goods, which causes high prices. Especially affects farmers and industrial workers who are not making large wages. So the cost of living is getting higher, and workers' wages won't buy as much. So of course workers are unhappy about this. And in 1919, 4 million workers go on strike. And this includes huge strikes such as the Boston Police Strike of 1919, the Coal Strike of 1919, and the Steel Strike of 1919. I mentioned the case of Sacco and Vanzetti. This was a case that involved 2 Italian immigrants. They were known anarchists, so they were considered political radicals, and they were accused of murder in a shoe factory. There wasn't a lot of evidence in the case. They received a very quick trial where no substantial evidence was produced. However, the consequences were severe because both men were executed despite the fact that many were still unsure of their guilt. Another sort of indicator of the Red Scare was the Immigration Act of 1917. Passed with an overwhelming majority, this act was passed despite the fact that President Woodrow Wilson vetoed it, went back to Congress and was passed there. This act banned, quote, homosexuals, feeble-minded persons, criminals, alcoholics, professional beggars, all persons mentally or physically defective, polygamous, illiterate adults, and anarchists. It also banned immigration from most of Asia and the Pacific Islands. In addition, the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 established the first ethnic quota system for selective admittance of immigrants to the United States. And this was driven by the concern about the importation of communist and other radical political ideas. We didn't want any more communists and anarchists coming into the country. So it limited immigration to 357,800 annually from the Eastern Hemisphere. But let's step back to the election of 1920, which pitted Republican Warren G. Harding, who opposed the League of Nations, with Democrat James M. Cox. Cox was endorsed by Wilson with the hope that he would promote the League of Nations, and voters overwhelmingly chose Harding. We'll talk more about the Harding administration in our next series of videos. So while Europe is struggling to rebuild after World War I, the United States came out prosperous and confident. We are actually now a creditor nation, meaning that we loan money or goods to other nations and they owe us money. The United States was unsure of how to use its new status. How should it interact with other countries? How should it continue to promote democracies throughout the world? Or should it make a solid return to isolationism? These are all questions that the American public are wrestling with. That's it for this presentation. I'll see you in class.